20 years later.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you.
Remembering the September 11th terrorist attacks, we have reports of courage, hope, and faith from New York, the Pentagon, and Shanksville, Pennsylvania. Plus,
boy, it may have happened in New York and Washington and Pennsylvania, but it affected the entire nation.
Cardinal Timothy Dolan on ministering to New York in the years since 9/11. And a story of survival, how one man's Catholic faith helped him while trapped underneath the rubble of the Twin Towers. On a special edition of EWTN News Nightly for Friday, September 10th, 2021.
Thank you so much for being with us tonight. I'm Tracy Sable. It is a day that needs no explanation. September 11th, 2001. The world is preparing to mark the 20th anniversary of the terror attacks. Nearly 3,000 men, women, and children lost their lives at the events that shook America and changed the course of history.
September 11th, 2001, the nation stunned by shocking acts of terror.
We've had a national tragedy.
The Twin Towers, a symbol of American success, reduced to rubble.
You have a second plane into the other tower.
34 minutes later, the Pentagon pierced and in flames. A fourth hijacked plane meant to target Washington, D.C., crashing in a Pennsylvania field after passengers fought back. 2,977 people killed after 19 men hijacked 4 U.S. commercial flights bound for West Coast destinations. Americans left mourning the tragic loss of life and their sense of security.
I can hear you. The rest of the world hears you. And the people who knocked these buildings down will hear all of us soon.
9/11 was an unforgettable day of loss and a time to rely on faith. A Catholic church near Ground Zero in New York remained open as first responders gave the ultimate sacrifice. Correspondent Mark Irons reports.
These are images that I close my eyes and I can see them. It doesn't go away.
20 years later, many can still vividly recall that horrific day. A 7-year-old Catholic school student in Brooklyn at the time, Teresa Heyer remembers burning office papers swirling around outside her upstairs classroom. They had blown over the water from lower Manhattan. Heyer and her second-grade classmates ran to their window.
And we just saw a huge cloud of smoke over the river, and it was the Twin Towers. And we just stared there and we watched, and then all of a sudden, the second plane, we saw a plane go in.
By that time, firefighters at Engine Company 10 across the street from the World Trade Center were responding, including Lieutenant Greg Atlas.
You know, it was no question. He just picked up his gear and ran in.
James West now points out his uncle's name, etched on the memorial where the South Tower once stood. Greg Atlas was one of the 343 firefighters who died to save others that day.
Somebody that my uncle actually saved in the tower. He asked my uncle what his name was, and he said, Atlas.
Just a couple blocks from the World Trade Center, St. Peter's Church was used as a relief station in the days following the attack. Firefighters and police officers would come here to rest, regroup, have a moment of silence or prayer before going back to Ground Zero.
A piece of landing gear from one of the hijacked planes was ripped off on impact and fell on St. Peter's roof. A priest, Father Francis Grogan, died on board one of those flights. And it was here at St. Peter's that the body of Fire Department Chaplain Father Michael Judge was carried. He was killed by falling debris in the North Tower lobby as he prayed for rescuers and victims.
They brought his body to the altar.
William Alvarado, the maintenance manager here at St. Peter's since before 9/11, says the church was more than willing to help first responders.
I just think it was just the right thing to do, right? We're a church, so our doors stood open.
But even now, 20 years later, he says things haven't completely returned to normal.
It took a long time for it to be built back up. You know, I know certain people that still don't come, to this part of town.
9/11 memorials now stand outside the doors, including statues of St. Joseph to honor those who perished working inside the towers, and St. Michael the Archangel, the patron saint of police officers. For these three Catholics who lived through 9/11, they are forever changed.
I think I, like a lot of other kids, had to do a lot of growing up that day to understand what was happening.
Their trust in God continues to guide them.
But you have to keep carrying on. And with your faith on your side, it helps you get through each day.
And they will never forget.
I said, if we just come together, I think we can slowly get by these hard times.
In New York City, Mark Irons, EWTN News Nightly.
And Mark will have more from New York tonight on EWTN News in Depth, including a priest who was at Ground Zero. Check EWTN.com for airing times. Pope John Paul II was at the papal summer residence when he received a call from the Vatican spokesperson about the tragedy that had just occurred in America. The now saint could not fathom such an evil. EWTN News Rome correspondent Colin Flynn has more.
The man who delivered the news to Pope John Paul II that 2 planes had been flown into the World Trade Center recalled the late Pope was shocked, not just by the event, but by how man could do such evil. The Pope was at the papal summer residence in Castel Gandolfo, just an hour from Rome, when he was told the news about the terrorism attacks on the United States. He stayed in front of the TV for a short time and then went to his chapel to pray. After prayer, the Pope attempted to contact President George Bush by telephone to communicate his sorrow, but failed as the president was flying on Air Force One at the time in an undisclosed location. So instead, Pope John Paul II decided to send his message of condolences and assurance of prayers via telegram, and was among the first of the world leaders to do so on that day. In the telegram, the Pope said, "I hurry to express to you and your fellow citizens my profound sorrow and my closeness in prayer for the nation at this dark and tragic moment." Now, growing up in Poland under Nazi and then Soviet occupation, Pope John Paul II was no stranger to tragedy, but it was said that this was an event that shook him deeply. And even though in his elder years he was suffering great pain himself, he went ahead with the general audience the very next day, saying that 9/11 was a dark day in human history and a terrible attack on human dignity. In the years since, Pope Benedict XVI and Pope Francis have both visited and prayed at Ground Zero in New York City. In Rome, Colin Flynn, EWTN News Nightly.
The current head of the Archdiocese of New York was not in Lower Manhattan on September 11th, 2001. That's because at the time, Cardinal Timothy Dolan was serving in the Archdiocese of St. Louis. He says on that day, while the attack was centered in the U.S., it was a strike on the whole world. Cardinal Timothy Dolan, Archbishop of New York, joins us now. Your Eminence, thank you so much for your time. We appreciate it. It is your 13th 9/11 anniversary as Archbishop of New York. Can you talk to us about leading the Archdiocese in the years since?
Yeah. Obviously, you know, here in the Archdiocese of New York, it won't surprise any of you to know that 9/11 is almost a holy day of obligation, a term that we Catholics would understand. And it's a day of just, the atmosphere is very tangible in the entire city, the entire wider community, of reverence and memory and of those who died, of gratitude for the first responders, of solidarity with the families who are still rightfully mourning and can never, ever forget. The number of commemorations is always astounding, Tracy, and this year it's a bit more because of the 20th. But every year we would have a memorial mass in the cathedral. Every year I'd be invited to prayer services at firehouses or police stations or hospitals. Every year there'd be remembrances at memorials. And this is a very good thing. This is a very good thing. We Christians, we Catholics, are people of memory. One of the last words that Jesus gave us before the cross was, "Do this in memory of me." Memory is so important to us. We never, ever want to succumb to an emotional or a spiritual amnesia. And we keep that memory alive here in New York, and I am glad that we do, because it's a source of solace to the families. It inspires noble sentiments in all of us, and in some ways, it kind of makes us vow all the more vigorously that we have to work for the kind of world where these things don't happen anymore.
Yeah, and you talked about memorial services. I understand you're leading a memorial service tomorrow for the 343 firefighters who were killed in the terror attacks.
Yeah.
Can you tell us more about that and maybe what your message will be to the families 20 years later?
Sure. You know, well, the New York Fire Department, they invited me in the morning. Usually on the morning, our local firehouse will invite me down for a prayer service and to remember the men from that station, the men and women who lost their lives on that day. And firehouses are known for their good breakfast, so we have a nice breakfast as well because it's a long day. So I'll do that tomorrow. And then you're right, we do have a mass that the FDNY, Fire Department of New York, asked us to have. And it'll have a particular poignancy this year. And I just, usually I'm going to mention gratitude to God for being the kind of God who can bring life from death, who can bring good from evil, and who can bring love from hatred. That's the kind of God we got. And that's what happened in New York, see? And that's what happened with the firefighters. That's what happened with the police and rescue. That's what happened with healthcare people. That's what happened with the families. That their sense of loss was in a beautiful way. It wasn't eliminated, that's for sure. Never should be, never can be. But in some ways it was soothed by the brave example of these people. And in some way it was assuaged a bit through the solidarity that they felt around them. Community, church, if you will, was at its best in those days. And I'm going to just suggest tomorrow that we not lose sight of that. And we remembered initially the fear, the anger, the bitter sadness, the feeling, I'm never going to be able to survive this. And yet he got us through. Those are the kind of sentiments of faith that we have to nurture.
Yeah, such an important message. And thank you so much for your time today, Your Eminence, and
Thanks
speaking with
for asking.
us.
Okay.
Means a lot. Thank you so much, Cardinal Timothy Dolan of New York. Thank you again.
Coming up.
Yeah, went in the Pentagon. Looks like it went in the Pentagon.
The 9/11 memorial at the headquarters for the U.S. military, and 2 of the lives impacted that day.
More than 180 people died when American Airlines Flight 77 slammed into the Pentagon. But in the midst of black smoke and rubble, America rose above the devastation. Correspondent Eric Rosales continues our team coverage, taking a closer look through the eyes of those who witnessed the plane crash into the nerve center of America's military power.
You are hearing audio from first responders and air traffic control on the day of the attack.
White House has been advised.
All right, I'll tell them. Yeah.
The city, just north of Crystal City.
Just to the north of your tower. Just
Give that. Yeah, stop all departures.
Stop all.
Yeah, went in the Pentagon. Looks like it went in the Pentagon.
In the moments inside the hallway burning to death seemed to last an eternity.
Lieutenant Colonel Brian Birdwell, now a Texas state senator, never thought a trip to the restroom would save his life. On the second floor of the Pentagon's outer E-ring, his office was in Flight 77's path. Birdwell was engulfed in flames. Parts of his polyester army pants melted to his skin. Burned over 60%, it took Birdwell more than 4 years and countless surgeries to recover.
My ears are artificial. My eye sockets have been rebuilt. My forehead.
And then banked up 395, and I was just maybe a mile and a half up that highway, sitting in that traffic jam next to the Pentagon.
Gary Bauer, president of the conservative organization American Values, witnessed the plane collide with the Pentagon.
I didn't know it then, but I would find out later that at that very moment, friends of mine died both as passengers on that plane and also at their desk in the Pentagon.
2 lives of many impacted that day. Since then, the Pentagon has been rebuilt, stronger, and a memorial stands at the site of the impact. If you've ever visited the Pentagon, you know about the 9/11 memorial that sits outside. But inside the Pentagon, in the E-ring, which was in the direct path of the plane, sits a more intimate memorial for America's heroes who died that day. The memorial is built right next to the chapel, the walls covered in metal similar to the inside of a plane. Etched in stone the names of those lost. On one side sits a Purple Heart, on the other the Defense of Freedom Medal, a book showcasing the lives of those lost, along with another filled with messages of hope and prayers. On the way to the memorial, quilts sent by Americans line the hallway.
This country is made great and kept great by the exertions of citizens who love this country and love their freedoms.
Both State Senator Brian Birdwell and Gary Bauer hope the 9/11 attacks will never be forgotten, especially with America's security challenges growing.
And at the same time all that is happening, among American young people, we're at the lowest levels of patriotism in modern American history.
A history they hope won't repeat itself. At the Pentagon, Eric Rosales, EWTN News Nightly.
And tomorrow on EWTN, Service and Sacrifice, Remembering 9/11. A film by the Knights of Columbus airs tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern. It features firemen, police officers, and priests all working together. Plus, a look at the Heroes Fund to help grieving families. That's tomorrow on EWTN. Up next, on the ground at the Flight 93 National Memorial in Pennsylvania. And
God is always with him. He was with me that night, and that's the reason I'm here.
A Catholic 9/11 survivor shares his story.
Edward Fount was among the 40 passengers and crew members who died when Flight 93 crashed into a field near Shanksville, Pennsylvania on 9/11. Now, 2 decades later, Fount's brother Gordon tells correspondent Owen Jensen how he was able to move forward after his brother's death.
Gordon Felt telling me about his brother Edward.
Ed was just a generous, gentle, brilliant man who loved nothing more than his family.
And Gordon, who I interviewed earlier this week at the Flight 93 Memorial, says if his brother were here,
I'll give him a big hug first.
The passengers and crew members of Flight 93, of course, had family and friends and futures to look forward to. But then came the morning of September 11th, 2001. Fast forward 20 years and visitors to this memorial and generations of Americans to come will see their names etched in stone and learn the story of how they fought back against evil. Flight 93 National Memorial Superintendent Steve Clark says over 400,000 visitors arrive here every year.
But when they come and they really experience these 2,200 acres, the Tower of Voices, the Visitor Center, and of course the Wall of Names, it just really empowers them, and they walk away with a much clearer understanding of what happened on 9/11 and what those 40 people were faced with, and ultimately what they were able to accomplish by thwarting the attack on Washington, D.C. That's where this plane was heading.
Gene Callahan, a first-time visitor, thinks of all the years of life they still had yet to live. People like Lauren Catuzzi-Grancolis, who died along with her unborn child.
It comes back. I mean, you remember all these poor people were on that plane and everything, and the destruction, and it is something that makes you really think back at how quick your life can change and the whole world can change.
And Paige Grogan, also visiting the memorial, was just a toddler on 9/11.
You feel touched, basically, when you leave here. Like, you come thinking like you're just going to see like this field with everything, but then you feel like different when you leave.
When you walk these hallowed grounds, your eyes are immediately drawn to this. As Gordon explains, it's where the struggle for the cockpit ended.
The boulder marks the impact site where the plane came down. We're standing here at the edge of the flight path. By the time the plane was just about to come down over our heads here, it was inverted, traveling just under 600 miles an hour at the end of a battle that our loved ones waged to try to retake control of the plane.
The sheer horror of that extremely violent day is hard to fathom in what is now such a peaceful, quiet setting surrounded by beautiful nature, breezy sunshine, and soft clouds. Gordon says his brother's spirit guides him.
I think if I had a chance to talk to Ed at the moment, I'd talk to him about his family, how proud I am of his wife, his children, how they've been able to honor him and respect him and move forward with their lives.
And Gordon tells me he could not have moved forward without his faith.
For me, there was never anger at God at all. He lifts us up, he supports me. The anger was directed at humanity, at terrorists that for some reason thought that making a political statement by murdering thousands of people was going to get them something.
And on this day, at the Flight 93 Memorial, chalk artists create portraits of the lives taken, capturing their smiles and humanity and what could have been. In Shanksville, Pennsylvania, Owen Jensen, EWTN News Nightly.
Well, September 11th is a day of prayer across the country, and for many survivors, a time to remember the miracles they say saved their lives. Catholic first responder Will Jimeno says a vision of Christ kept him alive while he was trapped underneath the rubble of the fallen Twin Towers. His story is portrayed in the 2006 film World Trade Center. Will Jimeno is an author and retired Port Authority police officer. Well, thank you so much for your time today. We're really grateful. As you know, as a nation, we are all really impacted by what happened on September 11th. But for you, it was really much more personal. I know you were actually trapped underneath the rubble of the World Trade Centers for 13 hours. Can you tell us what that day was like for you? You know, what was going through your mind, and also how your Catholic faith helped you through it all?
I remember just getting off the bus, and it looked like Armageddon. It was horrible. People were jumping, things were happening that just nobody should have to see. Thankfully, I had a great sergeant, Sergeant John McLaughlin, led me and fellow officers Dominic Pizzullo and Tony Rodriguez into the Trade Center, and we began rescue work. We met up with another officer, Christopher Amoroso, and we were heading from Tower 2 to Tower 1 when the buildings collapsed on us. It unfortunately took the life of Antonio Rodriguez and Christopher Amoroso right away, leaving myself, Dominic Pizzullo, and Sergeant McLaughlin trapped. Then when the second tower came down, Dominic was trying to save my life so we can get together, we could try to get Sergeant McLaughlin out, and we lost Dominic. For the next several hours, I cannot explain to everybody how horrific it was. It was pretty much hell. We kept fighting for our lives, And I'll be honest with you, after being crushed, losing teammates, actually being burnt from fire that came in, later a pistol went off because Dominic in his last moments pulled out his sidearm and shot a round up into a hole as a last-ditch effort for someone to hear us. When he passed, the weapon was on the ground, and I guess the fire lit it off, and I had 15 rounds shoot over my head. There was a point that night, and this is what I tell everybody, is that at that moment, I wanted to die. I wanted to give up. And I came as an immigrant from Colombia, South America, the United States. I'm Catholic. My parents raised me to believe in God and have faith, most of all. Those three words, faith, hope, and love. And at the moment that I wanted to die, I had made my peace with God. I said, God, thank you for 33 great years. Thank you for 6 years with my beautiful wife, Allison. 4 years with my little girl, Olivia. I said, God, the only thing I'm hurting today is that if I die doing the right thing as a police officer, but I'm not going to get to see my little girl be born. And I felt everybody was going to go to heaven that day because these cowards, as I call them, the terrorists, attacked innocent human beings that are just trying to make a better life for them and their families. I said, God, when I get to heaven, because I feel everybody's going there, I said, I'm going to ask you for two things. One, somehow, some way, let me see my daughter be born. And second, is just water. God, please, I'm so thirsty because I had become part of the building. I closed my eyes and I was going to give up. I was going to die. And as I closed my eyes, you can call it whatever you want. I call it, a vision. And I see a person walking toward me with a white flowing robe, no face, brown hair to his shoulders. Over his left shoulder, in the distance, was a tranquil lake with trees around it. Over his right shoulder, tall, endless sea of grass. And he's coming toward me. And in my heart, I know it's Jesus. And what does he have in his hand? And I tell people, you can laugh, but he had a bottle of water. And I snapped out of that vision, that dream, whatever you want to call it, knowing that Jesus was telling me to fight. And at that point, I woke up. I said to my sergeant, because we were the only two to survive from underneath the World Trade Center, and we're buried between both towers. I said, Sarge, if we're going to die, we're going to die trying. Because I realized if I had given up, I would have given up on my family. I would have given up my sergeant because I was closer to this hole where I could yell. I would have given up on my country. Most of all, I would have given up on myself and God, because God has blessed me with this life, and you just can't give it up.
You know, it's really hard to believe that Saturday will mark the 20th anniversary of the 9/11 terror attacks. I know you've spent years telling your story just as you told it to us. How do you hope to help others and honor, you know, the victims of the attacks? And I know that you also wrote a book.
Yes, and you know, that's the way I continue to honor people is through my speaking engagements to schools, universities, military groups, church groups. But then I wrote a book because I felt it's important as a survivor to share what has helped me survive, not only physically, but mentally and spiritually. So I wrote the book Sunrise to the Darkness, which I'm proud that is being carried by the 9/11 Memorial Museum, Amazon.com, BarnesandNoble.com, UniversityProfessorsPress.com. But it's a book that as a survivor, I'm able to gift to other people that are going through their darkness, and I want them to reach their sunrises.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us, and God bless you for what you do. Will Jimeno, retired Port Authority police officer and 9/11 survivor, thank you again.
Thank you. God bless everyone.
And thank you for joining us for this special edition of EWTN News Nightly. I'm Tracy Sable. We will never forget and will always pray for those impacted by this attack 20 years ago. Good night and God bless.